From Exabeam, this is the new CISO, a show about the people who lead IT security teams, the challenges they face, and how they overcome them. If you like what you hear, please rate, review, and subscribe to hear our new episodes first. Good day, everyone. I'm Steve Moore, and this is the new CISO at RSA. We're talking about resiliency, but more specifically, why teams fail. So why do we have these issues? Why do teams and people, individuals fail? And I have two wonderful guests today, Mr. Dave Damato and Mr. Sandro Bucchianeri. And I think I got that right. Last time you kind of teased me because I was not strong enough to attempt it, but you teased me. And did I get it right, Sandro?
Perfect this time.
You've really helped me develop, Sandro. And I appreciate that.
That's what good leaders do.
Right. Perfect. It goes with the theme today. For those that are familiar with the new CISO podcast, each of these individuals have been on the show before. As you note, some of you may be seeing this just as video, and later on we will take it and turn it into podcast material as well. For those that may not have met these individuals before, if they could each introduce themselves, that might help with the show. I start with you, Mr. Damato. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be back. Real quick, I am the currently the CSO at Gemini, which is a cryptocurrency exchange and custodian. We have just over $30 billion in assets under custody today. So that's pretty cool. Previously worked at PwC. I was an early member of the leadership team at Mandiant, and I was the first security hire in CSO at Tanium previously before this as well. And I guess most importantly, I'm a very sleep-deprived father of two wonderful daughters who are 3 and 4.
Thank you so much, David. Sandro.
Hi, Steve. Great. Thanks for the invite. And yeah, I'm Sandro Bucchianeri. I'm the group CSO at ABSA Group in South Africa. I'm based in Cape Town. So, ABSA is a financial institution, essentially a bank, operating across the African continent with satellite offices in New York, London, and Prague. And then before this, I was in the CSO at the National Bank of Abu Dhabi. And before that, I was in London, and before that, I was in the US. So as you can gather, I've lived on 5 continents already, and looking for a 6th home. So we'll see how that goes in the near future. But no, I'm glad to be here.
No, thanks for being here again, both of you. So again, the topic is sort of painted by the idea of resiliency, which is a theme this year at RSA. But I enjoy getting into the human, the leadership, the people, reasons behind things. So specifically failure, and why it's misunderstood, what we can do to help avoid it, but also as we face it, how are we a better leader? So I think just in general, I was going to start with a question that's defining failure, but I think it's best addressed in the form of kind of a wrapped question. To me, we often lack a definition of good within information security. So what's a good leader? What's a good team? So how do leaders keep teams resilient when we don't have a definition of good? And I'd like to start with Dave first on this. So how do we think about resilience? How do we think about avoiding failure when we often don't even know what good versus bad is? A thought there?
Yeah. So, it comes down to setting some expectations. And the best way to do that is through a series of different frameworks. And so it'll depend on your business. I think that's the key. And it'll also depend on your role. There's so many things that CSOs are being asked to do today. So it could be trust and safety. It could be physical security. It could be IT. You could be heavy in application security, for example. And so coming together with a series of different frameworks that really lay out your capabilities and start to perform some of the analysis to say, where are we today? Where do we want to be, next year or the year after is probably the easiest way to define what success looks like to your team and to leadership.
A point that we talked about earlier is even if we do everything well, sort of the table stakes and the points you mentioned, we still fail if we don't take care of the team. We tend to focus a lot about, or maybe not enough about the individuals, again, with this sort of idea of resiliency and failures there. You have things like high turnover and even high turnover for leadership. Sandro, what's your take on that? Do you think that a lot of the issues, or at least the majority of the problems we have in security, tie back to people not feeling safe or not feeling like they have an appropriate leader attached to their group? And what's the gravity associated with that, right? What's team to failure? What's your connection there?
Yeah, I think the key thing for me is that we treat our teams as people. So often in tech security, we teach it. We teach each other to understand what the mechanics are from a technical perspective, from an automation, from a robotic perspective. But then sometimes as a leader, you take that across to your team and you teach them or expect them to act as a robot. But they have feelings. They have kids. 2 young daughters, or 3 kids in my case. And that's the important thing for me, is that you understand that your people are exactly that. They are people, not robots. And the sooner we understand that they make mistakes, failure happens. Failure is one of the most important things ever. If you don't fail, how do you learn? So I think that's the key thing for me, is that understanding that your teams are individuals with challenges, with problems, with struggling to pay the rent, struggling to put a roof over their head, struggling to put food on the table. All those things plays a massive part in how they show up. And if you can understand that as a leader, I think you'll go a long way in building that resilience for your team.
Yeah, but that's playing, kind of the opposing side here. And anyone who knows me knows that this is not my perspective, but that's all hard. That's difficult. That's more than I signed up for, Sandro. That may be, but now think of your own circumstances. Think how you showing up. Think when you get out of bed this morning. I got out of bed this morning thinking, I have to go to work today. That's how I felt. And I don't feel like that. That was hard. Now, if I felt that way, what do the other 500 people in my security organization feel like when they have to wake up and it's cold outside and they have to go to the office? So you can play devil's advocate all you want. It's feelings are important when it comes to leadership, because we keep forgetting about that and how we then show up. I think also, if you remind the individual, the human, and understand them as that, over time, I think that I've personally seen, especially in crisis, which Dave has spent a lot of his time in, helping others with their crises. If you care about the individual and they know that you care, they don't second guess it when there is a crisis. Does that make sense? Like if they know that you're there for them, and then all hell breaks loose, they're not going to think, oh man, what's Steve going to do? Right? What's Dave going to do? What's Sandro going to do? I think that's an important element, that if you care about the individual, it's best in crisis. I know this is kind of a little bit of a twist on what we discussed, but David, any thoughts on that in terms of seeing people under pressure, seeing lots of different kinds of leaders with the eye toward resiliency in crisis? Which teams are most resilient?
It's usually pretty clear. So you have teams that sort of shut down, that want to pretend that there's not an issue, that don't embrace it, right? That are, to Sandro's point before, they're scared to embrace that failure and talk about it. And then there are those that rally around it, right? There's the ones that have practiced, some sort of blameless postmortem in the past, and they're excited to understand what happened and why it happened, and they're curious and they're interested, and they're not concerned about any type of retaliation for making a mistake. And those are the teams that typically swarm and fix an issue quickly and get to the other side without much of an impact, as compared to the others who sort of ignore it until it becomes a much bigger issue.
What do you think the long-term effect is of retaliation, as you mentioned? Maybe describe a little bit what you mean by retaliation, but what do you think if you're in a culture of retaliation? So if you see this, if you're, watching and you hear it and you think, okay, I see this, what's the long-term effect of retaliation as it relates to after action reports or, response and cleanup, that kind of thing?
I think the biggest outcome is bad decisions, which lead to a very unfriendly culture, a very poor, performing business overall. So typically what you have is individuals are afraid to voice concerns. So leaders are going based on, sort of this echo chamber of positive feedback. They believe they're making the right decisions, and in fact, they're making the wrong ones. So for me, getting honest feedback is always difficult, right? Because no one wants to tell the CSO, right, of, a large team or a large company, like, you're doing the wrong thing, or something's not working correctly, or we made a mistake. But that's like that feedback is critical to me being able to course correct. And I rely on that feedback because there's no way, I mean, when I joined Gemini, we were 11 people. It was pretty easy for me to figure out, what things were wrong. But now that we're, getting close to 50 individuals in the organization from a security perspective, I can't have that visibility. So I rely on people to say, hey, this is broken, or you're doing this incorrectly. And so that honesty of that feedback is incredibly important for a high performing organization.
So building on that, Sandro, how do you get there? So David defined kind of the issue, the cost of that issue, what he needs to help avoid it, but how do you get there? How do you get someone that always will come to you when they see something that's bad that no one else is voicing, and they say, okay, I'm going to break chain of command to make sure Sandro knows that this is something that's been maybe accidentally covered up, or that clearly he doesn't understand that this is an issue, or it's not been reported. How do you get that transparency leading to resiliency?
So I think it's leading by example. So showing that you can take feedback. Now, I love what Dave said. I love feedback. And if I show that I can accept criticism, constructive criticism, or criticism in general, it shows the team that, oh, this is actually okay. When you don't ridicule somebody for bringing something to you, and bringing the whole scorn in public thought, train of thought, then your teams will start coming through to you. And I think that's one of the key things. It's leading by example, remaining authentic in that environment, and creating a good work culture. Now, I talk about my personal failures so that my team can realize that I'm not some guy sitting at the top of the security food chain. I'm just a normal guy that needs to buy prepaid electricity or prepaid data for my phone. And it's making it relatable, making myself and my directs, telling them to make themselves relatable to the security analyst sitting on the floor, picking up things that nobody else is picking up. So I think that's the key thing for me.
I think being able to do just that, to share situations that maybe even citing back to earlier in your career, but doing it in an open forum when you were unsure, when you're insecure, when you're afraid of making a mistake, having that transparency and frankly the candor and carrying that through. And I've even found letting larger teams know, even getting up in front of them and speaking and saying, hey, I'm not sure about this, or I messed up, or I need your help here, right? Asking these sort of open-ended questions to say, how would you fix this? Or what's the worst part of your day? Or what's the worst part? How can I help fix that? And over time, little by little, you end up with a team that will absolutely run through walls for the team, because they know that you're providing this sort of air cover. You're open, because you're open to receiving maybe a bad message in the moment, you're going to get stronger in the long term. I don't know if you have anything sort of to add to that, but I think humility is a piece there. Whereas many CISOs, many officers, I think, kind of have this aura around them that many people look up and maybe even idolize a little bit. And if you're the junior analyst, you may be afraid to even say hello. That's what you have to avoid.
No, and I think you spot on right. It's when we could still walk the floors, pre-pandemic. It's getting to know people, just walking the floor, chatting to people. How's the dog doing? How's your football team doing? No, football, not American football. There's a big difference between the two. And it's understanding that. And you just mentioned it now, and I was about to say it, is the air cover. If I demonstrate that I am giving the necessary air cover for my team, everybody knows that I'm ultimately accountable for security. My head is on the block with the board and the exco. but everybody's responsible for security, from the receptionist all the way through to the business, through to the analyst on the floor. And that's the important difference. And if you can bring everybody along that journey with you, it makes the CISO, CSO's job significantly easier. And I think that's how we take things forward.
Dave, you said something that I thought was very interesting in an earlier chat we had. I was focusing on kind of things we get wrong in leadership, in information security, and kind of wondering, exploring why do we end up with what I believe is less experienced leaders in leadership positions in InfoSec. And I think it's due to the maturity or lack thereof of the profession. And we end up sort of vacuuming up maybe those that aren't ready to become a leader. And you just said something plain and simple that was sort of your approach. I'd like for you to kind of build on it. You said you don't think a definition of a leader should be different for security. And I think there's beauty in the simplicity of it, but we're not there. We don't get, the leadership, a CISO or a CSO is not as defined and is not as the table stakes aren't there for, let's say, a CFO. And I think we evaluate ourselves differently and maybe even ignore, again, for purposes of program resiliency, it's a big risk. So you made that statement. How did you come to that sort of simple but elegant formulation on, hey, this is no different. So how is it no different? And what do we need to remind ourselves of in order for it to be the same?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all focused on security, but if we want to be executives and part of the executive team, then we need to be actually like having an impact on the business, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. And how we do that from a business perspective is to make sure that we are, one, like considering, helping scale other organizations is a big one, right? Like how does my organization impact the scale of other organizations, and how do I lend to that? How do I lend to supporting some of the top level goals that the organization has? So all those things are very important. The other thing is when you're looking at working in the executive team, you're probably not going to be talking about security. You're going to be talking about, how do we, come up with a better pay scale for our employees? How do we come up with benefits? How do we what hiring are we going to do at the executive team or within the organization? What organizational issues are we running into? Like very, very few times as a member of the executive team, am I talking about security's direct impact on the organization? I think the value that I'm bringing as a generic leader, right, is the ability to weigh in on some of these issues that we face as we grow and we scale that are, things that any business would face, not just a security organization, for example.
Sandro, I want to go to you. So building on what Dave said, how do you get there? If you don't have background in those other areas, and let's say that you are a proficient security leader, but as a generalist, maybe you're lacking a bit. Maybe you just don't have the time in some of these other areas, but you're looking to be relevant there. You're looking to give the advice that Dave's mentioning, to be a part of truly the SLT, ELT of these organizations. Where might one begin? What's the mindset? What are the questions? What are the partnerships you should form, if any?
So there's two parts, right? One is the technical acumen. You obviously need technical acumen to some degree, whether it's risk, it's networking, whatever the case may be. But the most important thing that I've found over the years is business. Understanding business is most important. And I think I mentioned this on the show, and I mentioned it again. Dr. Eric Cole said it to me in 2007. He said, if you could latch your technical expertise to business expertise, you've got it made as a CISO, as a CSO. And that's, I think, the key thing for me is, latch yourself onto a business leader. Understand what their concerns are now. What is their profit margin? What is their revenue targets? All those things. Understanding what your business does, right? Understanding what Gemini does, understanding what ABSA does is exceptionally important as a leader. It's all well and good that I'm going to be protecting the organization, but what am I protecting? What are the assets that I'm protecting? What is that risk appetite of the organization? All those things plays a very important role as how I show up as a leader and how you can lead those teams forward. And I think that's one of the key things that I've learned.
Dave, you mentioned to me, we were talking about communication and specifically communicating the value of not getting hacked. It was based on this idea that I think that, and I believe this, that we often report on kind of the wrong things, and that security still today is difficult to measure. There's many ways to measure it, but I think there's few relevant ways to measure it, especially through a business lens. And so if you're a team leader and you're looking to get credit, you're looking to inspire your team that you're relevant up. Your statement was, we got to work on sort of getting credit for our successes and not being judged on our failures, which is the value of not getting hacked. That's a tall order. How do you report on that? How do you communicate that? How do you share those ideas? How do you condition an environment of the leadership to say, hey, like, we're still doing good things even though seemingly nothing happened?
Yeah, I mean, there's that sort of adage, never let a good crisis go to waste, but hopefully it's not a crisis you're having, it's a near misses you're having. And so,
Right.
in any security organization, you're going to have events, right? They're not quite incidents, but they're events. And usually those are things that are not communicated very well to senior leadership. So one of the things I really enjoy doing is when we actually have an event and we're successful in preventing it from becoming a much bigger issue, that we communicate that. So we talk about like what happened, what went wrong. It's part of the postmortem process in general, but out of that, you can extract a narrative that is very powerful, that can enforce with leadership. Here's an example of things that we do that you may not know about, and here's how it's actually having an impact on the organization or the business.
People feel good about that when they see those things, or I always did, and I always loved sharing those stories, those narratives, and they make, at minimum, they make you feel like, boy, the last 7 hours I spent on this issue, it's kind of worth it. We put it together, we thought about it, we dissected it, we put a story together, and it went out, and maybe you get an attaboy or an attagirl on this, right? Good job. That's a great thing. When you share that though, and it's going up, let's say, is communicating the value of not getting breached, not getting hacked. How long is the message? Well, first off, how is it shared? Is this a visual depiction? Is this words? Is it one paragraph? Is it 7? What's your recommendation of the format of the message, high level, and to whom does it go?
Yeah. So as broad as you can get it to go. The company also likes to see what people are working on. It depends on your culture, how comfortable you are sharing some of that. We use a couple of really great stories internally about, types of different attempted attacks, right? Where, we've prevented it from having any impact on the organization, but it demonstrates here are the types of things you should be looking for as an employee. It's part of that education. So generally I like to do 2 things. One is I'm a big believer in documentation. So writing things down helps you sort of work out the clear message, the problem, what you did, how you resolved it. I tend to write a lot of things down because it makes things more clear. And then the follow up with either the executive team or individuals in more of like a story format to explain it very briefly. But it's usually very quick. People don't have the attention time span to listen to, or to read 3 or 4 pages. It's a paragraph or 2. It just summarizes the issue, sort of makes it relevant to the individual, whatever level you're communicating it to, and allows them to put it in the back of their mind and get some of that additional education.
It's funny you mentioned not having a lot of time. I accidentally would communicate to my team. We would send messages out. You're inundated with stuff, and I would say, you've got 8 seconds, and 8 seconds came from the duration of. And I have no interest in rodeo or bull riding, but I was like, 8 seconds is the duration of this. I actually think that a lot of that sport is backward, personally. But anyway, I was like, you've got about 8 seconds, and I just made that up. It was kind of what I would say that at the time I had, that I would give to identify, okay, why am I getting this message? What is it? And so we had this whole format that we kind of tweaked on, and there's a different way to italicize and bold. And so there was a theme to every message I would send out, almost every, and it worked. And so the joke was 8 seconds. The funny thing is that somebody did a big study this was years ago, and the study came out recently, and I don't have it in front of me, or I would cite it. But it was effectively you've got 7 or 8 seconds that Google or somebody did this massive, probably cost $1 million, to come up with what Central Indiana Steve figured out accidentally. But you're true. You don't have much time, even if you're sharing something special. You need to kind of get to the point, and so I think a paragraph or two is probably adequate. Sandro, any other thoughts
I
on
think
on information sharing? Yeah.
Yeah, I think depending on the audience, right? So no, board meetings quarterly, but catch up with your board members as often as you can as a CISO. Your exco, that's monthly meetings anyway, so you keep that information there, and then as you go down the who you want to communicate with. I think the biggest failure in security is not anything on the process side. It's got to do with communication. We're terrible at it, and I think finding a way to make something relevant to someone that doesn't care about security is exceptionally important. So whether that's a funny video that's being put together, we hired a comedian to do our cybersecurity program originally, at least to do our comms, and we called it #cybersecurity is no joke. And then there was a comedian delivering the cybersecurity message, and then there was a joke at the end, which was great. And you got people smiling and more engaged. And then they asked, when's the next one coming up? So you need to keep people's interest in the wonderful topic of cybersecurity, as often as you can. So that's the one part of it. The other part of it is infographics works like a charm.
Yes.
Who doesn't like looking at cool pictures? And making it simple. Why go down the nth degree to explain how DMARC and DKIM works when all you really care about is that this is going to help you stop phishing? Now, there's a massive difference between the two. I can spend hours talking about these things, but that's the important thing about your messaging is keep it plain and simple. It doesn't need to be overcomplicated. And exactly to my earlier point about buying prepaid data and airtime and all those things, my market, the exco members, the board members have those similar challenges. So if you're going to overcomplicate things, you're going to lose their interest in that 8 seconds that you mentioned.
Dave, you talked to us earlier about that we also do a bad job managing expectations just in security. And I think that if you don't manage them well, it will affect the team with unnatural and unnecessary pressures. You outlined sort of setting boundaries there, and I've even been having conversation with folks that up the stream on the show about even when you interview, it begins there. It begins when you start speaking with a company, and sort of, my father used to say, you have to teach people how you want to be treated, kind of like an addendum to the golden rule. What did you mean by that, and where do you think we mess up, or in general, on not setting expectations or taking on too much? Explain that to us, please.
Yeah, so I think one of the largest challenges everyone would say in security is that there's not enough staff, there's not enough, resources. And so managing resources becomes incredibly important. That's where setting expectations is key. So you have this sort of balance between operational work, emergencies, things come up, right? And then you have projects that you're working on. You want to be proactive. So teams that are failing quite frequently aren't proactive, right? They're just constantly responding to fires. They don't have any time to prepare and actually dig themselves out of that hole. And so if you're able to set proper expectations, you can say, here are the things that we're going to be working on. Here are the things that we're doing. You get buy-in from the business. And then let's say you have a bunch of operational tasks that pop up that are emergencies that the business needs you to do. You can come back to leadership and say, here are the things we agreed were important. Here are the things we're now being asked to do. I can only do this many things. We need to hire more people, or we need to bring in a consultant. So I think it's very important to being able to, make it for a great experience for employees, so they're not overwhelmed, but also allow yourself to get those extra resources when you need to, or push back on new requirements when they come up.
I think also, surprises. So you have a plan. We spend all this time of kind of creating our yearly plan, our strategy, our goals, And then inevitably there's distractions. Now those can come in the form of an event, an incident, something we have to respond to that's obviously unplanned. But then there's this intrusion that happens often where there's a surprise audit, or there's hey, can you also own this other thing? And there's multiple levels of distraction. I find that also begins to erode the emotion assigned to your daily work of the staff, right? If you're getting kind of pulled around. And I guess what I'm saying is, or what I'm about to ask is, how do you say no? To what do you say no? And then where do you draw the lines, right? I'm meeting a lot of people, and they're taking on more as a result of, the things that have happened in the last year. And many of them are eager to own more. But I would caution against that for a couple of reasons. Why might you not want to own more? And how do you gracefully say no if you think it's the right thing to do? David?
Yeah. Context switching is the worst. So we definitely try and avoid that. The way in which we do that, again, is, so we actually use Kanban internally, which is a great mechanism to prevent that from happening. So it limits how much work you can actually have in progress at any given time. So the nice thing is you're able to assign bits of work to people. They have a discrete task that they can work on in addition to some of their operational abilities. If we're asked to take on more, we have to move some of those tasks off the board, right? So it's a very easy way to show to anyone who comes to me, okay, here, you want us to do this? These are the things I'm going to have to move off the board. Now, a lot of times that will be my decision. And that comes back to what's the value of a great leader? It's being able to make the right decisions and prioritize the right things. Right. A lot of times it's my team's helping to prioritize a lot of those things as well. But that's definitely how I sort of balance those, because otherwise, in the past, what I've seen is people just keep taking on more and more work. And you're right. It's just context switching, and teams get burnt out and they get frustrated, and then nothing gets done because you're working on a million different things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a key one, is that, depending on the individual that always says yes, they're their own worst enemy. And I normally relate it to a fire, right? When you're firefighting, you are concentrating on the main blaze, but then you get these small little fires popping up all over the show. And you need to deal with that as well. Otherwise, that then turns into another big problem like you're currently dealing with. And the way we do it, we have strategic change. So things that actually impact the strategy, whether that's putting in a new vulnerability management program or talking about access management, whatever the case may be. And then there's the operational stuff. So those are the two buckets that you would typically have. But again, it comes down to that air cover that we talk about, is seeing which one of your direct reports have the ability for more without burning them out, and also who needs help with learning to say no. And then the last thing I'll cover off is risk. We keep talking about risk, is understanding the risk of the environment. We can do as many things as we want, but what does it actually mean to the overall risk of the organization? If a business is willing to eat more risk, I can start turning off a few things in the security side and freeing up some capacity. So that's very important that you understand that in the overall context of the business.
Add to that, I'd say one of the interesting things when you talk about prioritization that often gets left out is finding tasks that increase leverage. So it's risk is obviously usually going to be number one for you, right? You need to reduce risks that are unacceptable. But how do you, it's like, if you've ever played like a tower defense game or something, there's some series of things you may build to mine gold more quickly, right? To increase your ability to produce more later. And so if you can make those investments early on, right? For all the gamers out there, you basically increase your resources by gaining efficiencies through some of the tasks that will increase leverage. So we try and also prioritize based on those things that maybe automate tasks, or, to Sandro's point, like if we can accept a risk in some area, or we can eliminate it by implementing a control, we can reduce the time we spend other places. A good example is something I did when I quickly came on board. We have a very few users who have Microsoft Office, and we just disabled macros because no one's using them, right? And it's just a whole entire attack vector that's just disappears that we don't have to worry about. Or, you implement YubiKeys, and now you really don't have to worry about credential harvesting, right? So things like that can be huge accelerators.
I think one of the greatest things you can do for the junior level staff or mid-level staff is after an event or an incident, there's a desire to go to return to good, whatever that is, at a credential, at a device, at a entity level, whatever that is. But often we repeat the same issue over and over again. So we detect it, we respond, we clean up, right? And the reason is because we're not also making changes to the environment that help disrupt this sort of cycle of compromise. It's the suggestion that comes at the result of hiring smart people to do an analysis. It's the macro thing that Dave just mentioned. It's the, not allowing execution of PE files from temp directories. It's something that will help stop or make more difficult for the adversary. And the benefit is when you do those things, not only does it eliminate or lower the frequency, but the staff sees you as the leader initiating the change into another business area or another technical area, because there's testing, right? You disable macros, now procurement can't run, their spreadsheet database that should be in an app rather than a 40 meg Excel document, right? So but that takes effort. You have to care. You've got to give a damn. You've got to understand the human element. So that is one of the best motivators. It's a strange one, but so I'm going to open up to both of you. I mean, seeing that change, not only is it good for security, but it's good for staff resiliency as well, which is the whole point of us meeting today.
Yeah,
Thoughts?
I think user experience is so underplayed. It's insane, right? I know security has always been touted, or the CSO has always been touted as Dr. No. And I heard that way back when we tried to do something. Nope, you can't do it. You can't open up this port. Are you crazy? What are you trying to do? Okay, no worries. And then you'll find out they plug in broadband or ADSL, or go back in time. They'll plug something into the network because they need to get out to the internet. And then they bridge the internet with your internal network because you couldn't allow them to do something that they needed for their job. Procurement is a perfect example. So I think understanding what your users' needs are is exceptionally important. Dave, you made a great point about putting in something as simple as a YubiKey or a multi-factor solution goes a long way in solving your two-factor risk that you would have had otherwise. And it's a great experience. You made it easy for the user. If you make things easy for people, to the point of automation, they won't do anything bad for the most part. I have to also caveat that. If you think of those things you strap on for your muscle building, Bruce Lee used to talk about it all the time. 200 push-ups in 5 minutes, or whatever the case may be. That's a lazy man's way of getting to the gym, but you still need to go and walk. And if you watch WALL-E and how everybody has evolved at some point where everybody's cruising around on these floating wheelchairs, that's not where we want to be. We don't want to make it that easy for everybody, but I think the user experience component is exceptionally important in your whole security journey.
You lost me there brief. I had to run that back in my mind. You have to speak American when I was like, what does he say? It's Wall-E, the cartoon, right? Is
Wall-E. Yeah,
all right,
Wall-E.
yeah. You had a long, it's like
Pixar
Wall-E.
movie. Yeah,
Wall-E.
yeah.
Dave, did you pick up on that? Did you get what he meant?
I got it.
Well,
a bit more sophisticated.
He's well traveled as well, Steve.
That's because you're smarter than I am. Yeah, that's a good.
I can do the New Jersey twang if you want.
Let's keep that out of here. I want to go back to storytelling. Sandro, you had kind of a trio of, rather than avoiding the negative, telling positive stories, and there's sort of a path that you go down, sort of a recommendation that you have for a team. I think there are 3 distinct stories or messages. Share those with us again, please.
Yeah, sure. So I always talk about where we were, so we know our history. I'm going to try and speak more clearly so that you can understand, Steve. So
more slowly, please. Yeah, thank you.
So where we were, where we are, and ultimately where we are going. Right. And I think that gives a great journey or start of a story of understanding now, who are we? what have we done exactly to the positive, instead of talking about the negative all the time, is talking about those positive things that we are doing. So, we were in a terrible space 5 years ago. So I'm giving you a real world example. We were in a terrible space 5 years ago. We were dictated to on how to run our security program. So that's where we were. Where we are now, we are, I think, in a world-class maturity level, as benchmarked by external providers multiple times. And the journey to get us from where we were to where we are now was a great one. And you talk about that. And then you talk about, so, okay, great, we're here now. So, but where are we going to create that anticipation and that excitement in the organization to say, well, no, we've been talking about zero trust for the best part of 10 years. We want to make things easier. We want to move aggressively to the cloud, etc. No, that's essentially where we are going to go to. And I think putting it in those three buckets and then tying them together in some form of story or some form of infographic or some form of comedian, I think is a great way to move things forward and make people buy into your journey.
A quick addition to that, you said even with that, and which I think those are marvelous. I had something similar from my past with, who we are, what we do, and where we're going, kind of a same, very, very similar, very valuable to have those. You said even with that, though, there's still some difficulty measuring or communicating how much risk you want to take on. You mentioned this before, but you had kind of an interesting tactical tactical measure that you liked. I might be putting you on. Do you remember what that was?
And I don't remember a lot of things.
It's not meant to be a quiz, but there's something I really liked it, and you measured against. It was you spent and talked about some time of the residency of an adversary during an incident or during an event. As
dwell time,
right?
Thanks.
It's okay. Hey, we all
dwell
make
time.
mistakes.
No, dwell time. Thanks. Dwell time is exceptionally important. That's because we don't think about it so often like as we used to. But dwell time is exceptionally important. The time an attacker gets into your network to the time that they that you discover them. It's easy. It basically measures, is your program working? 4 or 5 years ago it was in months. Now it's in I think it's in weeks. And I'll never forget, I got a very good friend that does forensics all around the world, and he said the shortest time that he heard was that they picked the adversary up in 3 minutes, 4 minutes. The worst he's heard is that they've been in the network for 6 years.
Yeah.
And I said, no, that's impossible. Really? He said 6 years, which means that the adversaries know the environment better than every CIO that's come through, every network architect that's come through. Yeah, they can pretty much design everything. And I think that's why dwell time is exceptionally important, so that you can also show your teams that things are working. Are you doing things that are moving your program forward or moving that bus forward? Or are you just standing still?
Yeah. Speaking of knowing the network, the adversary actually will do a pretty good job of figuring out your network, probably better. Might even put together their own documentation. They'll certainly take time to read yours and make use of it for sure. Dave's smiling because he knows this probably better than anybody.
And Dave loves documentation. So
we used to get our documentation from the attackers. That was
right. Can we just can we pay for a network diagram, please? I kind of in the same vein, Dave, you kind of approached, the first question is just how am I successful, or how successful am I was kind of your step zero on that. How do you break that down? How do you measure your success or not? Are there methods or processes there?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of a higher level goal, which is a little bit more anomalous, that's related to cryptocurrency. And then there's some that are related to more of the business. So when you think about a retail business like ours, very focused on reducing the amount of fraud or scams, very focused on making it easier for individuals to be more secure, providing things like, we're the only exchange that's provide support for WebAuthn, for example, on both mobile and web. So you can actually have a non-phishable token, which is pretty awesome. Allow list, things like that you don't even find for most banks for like ACH transfers, for example.
Right.
So we're trying to go above and beyond there. and then providing a frictionless sort of experience, like how quickly and securely can we get people onboarded, and things of that nature. I will say sort of the overarching measurement we have is bringing trust to the community. So if you think about crypto, it's sort of this nascent industry that has had issues in the past with trust, and so a lot of what we do is aimed at how can we instill more trust in the industry, and it's very hard to do, right? It's a crypto is very new. There's not a lot of friction, which is why people love it as compared to traditional financial organizations and financial systems. And so we're coming up with new ways to protect individuals in a financial experience with less friction, right? So that increased speed makes it much harder to introduce controls, right? Because we need to make things that allow that speed to continue, but then also protect the users.
You noted though that some of your favorite, so that's sort of the mindset, but some of your favorite methods, just testing in general. So evaluation, you mentioned, red team, purple team, utilizing that as a sample set for success. How does someone get that right? So maybe not exactly your playbook, but in general, I'll only put a little more on this. I know a lot of organizations that do pen testing or have pen testing done in their environment, but it's absolute garbage, meaning they have it done and it's completely worthless. You're talking about doing, I've seen millions of dollars wasted on shitty pen tests. And it's because it doesn't represent really what the adversary is likely to do. So Dave is going to put together tests or recommend someone to put together this. Again, am I successful? How can I communicate that? Am I leading to resiliency? What's what's the thrust there?
Totally. We do pen tests. I love them. The red teaming stuff is very interesting and cool. And we love them as well as a great metric to test how well you're doing, right? You can test that dwell time very easily, right? Are we detecting individuals when they breach a laptop or a system very quickly or not? I think the key there is that most organizations are not at the maturity to take advantage of that yet. And so I always caution against doing something like that. If you can go through a tabletop exercise and identify, like, we probably wouldn't catch that, or we probably wouldn't catch that, you should do those things first. And then you can start running red and purple teams on a more consistent basis. So that's the way I like to sort of approach these things. There's a level of maturity you need to build up to first, and then they're extremely valuable. You have organizations like Microsoft or Google who are doing these things on an ongoing basis, and they can measure sort of the results of that over time, and you can see which way you're trending based on the different controls that you implement. So to me, that's sort of the highest order of measurement, is actually exposing yourself to realistic attack scenarios.
And specific. Okay, I'm glad you ended saying that, not just because there's many organizations that will allow you to pay for a test that is not representative of what is likely to happen during an attack.
Right. I mean, like, we know the organizations out there you'd want to hire. They're going to be very smart organizations and individuals that will tailor the experience to your business specifically and make it as realistic as possible. So, it's not the vuln scans or, type of pen tests that you see a lot of times for compliance reasons.
Right. Sandro?
Yeah, no, I'm chuckling because that's spot on. It's you need a realistic test of your environment, because my environment is completely different to Dave's environment. We may have similar vulnerabilities that pops up, but I may have insiders focused on specific things to try and get cash out of the organization or customer data out, etc., versus what Dave's organization is. So I think it's important that when you're going through that sense check of organizations out there, the targeted attack simulation, essentially, that's what you're looking for, is how can somebody get in your environment and create a user that essentially is going to get paid at the end of the month through payroll. Those are the kind of things that you want to do, not just because I went to a conference much like this many years ago, walk the floor, and every time you're walking the floor, by the time you end from one end of the hall to the other end of the hall, you've got a stack of business cards of, hey, all these cool things that you can implement to solve your problem. There is no silver bullet to security. It's the holistic approach for everything that will help you move the dial forward. And that's very, very important to understand, because many times, I'm sure Dave just like you, Steve, you've been pinged numerous times by a vendor that says, buy my product. If you had my product, that would never have happened. You have no idea what just happened. So yeah.
That's the absolute worst thing to hear. If you're in the middle of working on a problem like a breach or a major incident, that is the worst.
I'm putting a book together of all the emails and LinkedIn messages that I received like that. I think we can all contribute to it. It will make some fun reading.
So one of the things on resiliency that I think is, and I've got pages more of notes from both of you. We won't have a chance to get to anywhere near all of it, but one of the things I think is important, Sandro, you had a great story on this, is just, I'm curious, hiring, can you hire for resiliency? And are there attributes? Obviously, you need to care about the individual. You need to be a leader. You need to have all these other things we've talked about. But if you could hire for resiliency, can you? And if you can, is there something in the process to look for? Sandro, I want to go back to you.
Yeah. So when we do a hire for our academy or get the students to come through, we ask them a simple question, because we are testing for a specific ability, their innate ability to protect. And we ask them a simple question. So I'm meeting Steve and Dave. I'm at a backpackers lodge somewhere in the world. We're having a barbecue, and I'm meeting the two of you. And then we go back to the dormitory, and a fire breaks out. And the question is very simple: what do you do? And the answers you get varies from one end to the other. Now, one person say, "No, grab my stuff and run out of the building as quickly as possible." And then you get others that says, "No, wake everybody up and get as many people out of the building as possible." And then the other one will say, "Oh, as I'm grabbing all my stuff, I'm going to look specifically for Steve and Dave, because I had a great relationship. We had a great couple of beers over the barbecue, and I'm trying to get them out as well as part of my process of leaving." So the responses you get to that is very important, because I don't want somebody that's just going to gun for the door, for the exit as quickly as possible, because they're not going to care. So if things go wrong, then yeah, that's not the people that you rely on. So I think those are the kind of things that we use in our process when we're going through the academy hiring, to see, are these the individuals that we want in our organization, and are these the type of individuals that we want to develop into cybersecurity experts, into white hats. And it's very interesting when you get some of the results. But yeah, that's some of the stuff that we do.
David, I saw you smile. Any thoughts there? Any other tips or perspectives you look for in terms of hiring, or maybe even when you interview for resiliency?
Yeah, I mean, I like the story approach, right? Something that's unrelated to maybe like technical skill set. I think much of my philosophy on hiring was developed when I was at Mandiant. We weren't hiring experts in forensics because they didn't exist, right? There was no expert in enterprise incident response. And so really we focused on finding individuals that were smart, right? They had the intellect to pick up new concepts very quickly. They were passionate about the subject matter area, right? And they were good. They sort of aligned with the culture that had been defined. And so to me, that's generally what I'm looking for. Obviously, when we're hiring more experienced individuals, there's some technical experience, right? Technical expertise that we're looking for. But, overall, we're really looking for smart, curious, passionate people that sort of fit within our culture. And if they don't have, the exact technical requirements that we need, they'll learn. I'm not too concerned about it. So that's generally the approach I've taken.
Perfect. Gentlemen, I thank you so much for your time today. We could go on for hours, but we all have other things to do as well. And this has been, I sincerely appreciate the time you've made for us and all of what you've shared. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dave.
That's it for this episode of the new CISO. Thank you for listening. Check out more episodes on exabeam.com/podcast. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe to get brand new episodes first.